1869, 1954, a span of 84 years, yet the life of Henri Matisse can be summarized in one sentence. A painter only exists through his pictures. Pictures, sculptures, and works in other media, some 270 in all, were exhibited in Paris to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Matisse's birth. Unprecedented loans from the Soviet Union and the United States, thanks to which masterpieces once owned by Matisse's greatest collectors, the Russians Shchukin and Morozov, the Americans Gertrude, Leo, and Sarah Stein, were brought together for the first time, the unstinting collaboration of the artist's children, and the generous help of private and public collections in Europe and America, all this made the centennial exhibition organized by France at the Grand Palais the most complete Matisse show ever assembled. He was born at Le Cateau, a drab town in northern France, and died in Nice on the Riviera. The shift from north to south may stand as a symbol not only of Matisse's life, but also for his work, a 65-year journey toward the sun. Like his father, a grain merchant, he was obstinate, hard-working, thorough, and he might well have followed an equally sedate course. In fact, he was trained as a lawyer, had he not one day fallen prey to a strange force, a force which, he reflected in his old age, as I now realize, was alien to my life as a normal man. The 20-year-old Matisse, in bed recovering from appendicitis, received a paint box from his mother to while the time away. The moment he opened it, Matisse was overwhelmed. Back on his feet, it was not painting that he gave up, but law. He began it in the darkness of Parisian art schools and the somber, realistic manner of traditional painting. Not until 1905, at the age of 35, did he achieve his own luminous style. Half a century later, Matisse summed it up masterfully. The characteristic of modern art is to participate in our life. Before Matisse, art was an imitation of life. He made it into a participation in life. Direct relation to the viewer is best achieved through the use of flat, decorative space and bright colors. This has always been the way of Oriental art. The struggle between East and West, between flat surface and deep space, between pure tones and shaded colors, between emotion and intellect, will continue throughout Matisse's life. It will force him to wage over and over again battles which he appeared to have won once and for all. The three young girls painted in 1896, 1906, and 1910 show Matisse's purpose. Despite its straightforwardness, the little Breton girl still remains trapped behind the picture plane as behind a clear glass pane. Margot is a portrait of the artist's daughter, Marguerite. Over the years, she was to prove one of his favorite models. Margot, and even more the girl with cat, strike out boldly at us. Since the Renaissance, painting had expressed itself in the third person. Matisse makes it speak in the first person and address itself directly to the spectator. In 1898, Matisse, discovering the dazzling brightness of the Mediterranean, seems ready to adopt the lesson of the East. Instead, he turns again to darkness and to the study of massive volumes and perspective. In short, to the basic concerns of Western art. The explanation of this sudden turnabout lies in Matisse's own conflicting nature. I am a romantic, but with a good half of the scientific, hence the struggle from which I sometimes emerge victorious, but exhausted. The strain is necessary to achieve the ease. Pedestrian view must precede poetic vision. One must know how to walk on the ground before dancing on the tightrope. Never will the conflict be sharper than in the years 1900 to 1904. I am torn between the Orientals and Cézanne. Matisse's preoccupation with Cézanne, who marks the climax of the Western tradition, finds striking expression in a series of tense, almost brutal nudes. Weight, three-dimensionality are stressed, and bright colors, which tend to project outward, are banished. Almost banished, that is. If you look closely, you will see that the fire lit in Corsica in 1898 is not extinguished, but smoldering, an orange flame running along a dark blue leg. In Interior with Harmonium, it counteracts the flight of the room toward the vanishing point by driving the pure pink of a flower up against the picture plane, the same pink flower that keeps the artist's wife wearing a kimono from receding into the bottomless distance. In the summer of 1904, Paul Signac invited Matisse to Saint-Tropez. Signac practiced and preached a method of painting based on the use of pure colors juxtaposed in mosaic-like touches. Matisse promptly adopted Signac's method. His luxe, calme et volupté so enchanted Signac that he later bought it. But in 1905, at Collioure, near the Spanish border, the splendor of the Mediterranean summer made him throw caution to the winds. He kept Signac's pure colors, but discarded the meticulous system in which Signac had harnessed them. Fauvism was born. Woman with Hat, which burst upon the public's awareness at the Salon d'Automne of 1905, deserves to be called the manifesto of Fauvism. It made Matisse famous, many at the time would have said infamous, and it marked the end of his long years of hardship. Fauvism is the triumph of pure color, but color for Matisse was a means, not an end. Matisse had rediscovered that the less information you communicate about the subject, the more easily our imagination communes with it. The simpler the colors are, the more strongly they act upon our intimate emotions. The years 1908 to 1911 are largely taken up by this intense spiritual effort of simplification, this search for unmodulated colors and bold, terse outlines. But in the red studio, the entire picture is flooded with the same brick red color, excepting the bright patches made by the artist's other works. Yet although the red studio looks flat, it does not feel flat, because, as Matisse said, imagination provides spatial depth. Repeat performances like Red Studio and Pink Studio, one picture being more realistic, the other more transposed, are frequent in Matisse's work. They remind us that for him, simplicity was no simple matter. What he calls duality of feelings is never definitively overcome. It is feeling that matters above all. Feeling alone can bridge the gap between the artist and his model, between the picture and the spectator. Painting has shifted from indirect to direct discourse. For the first time since the age of Giotto, the connection between image and viewer has been restored. Those same years that see him at work on his most dramatically simplified pictures also find him producing a series of still lives torn between Cézanne and the Orientals, between perspective and decoration. In Blue Camailleux, Matisse tries to mask the fissure in space with a piece of textile that starts as a tapestry and by insidiously curving from vertical to horizontal, ends as tablecloth. It is an awkward solution compared to the masterful simplifications achieved in the same period, but the duality of feelings is irrepressible. Only a work based on emotion can be shared, and the best vehicle of emotion is color. I feel through color. It is therefore through it that my canvas will always be organized. An art can be said complete only if we participate in it, if we identify with it. The red dessert shows us exactly the nature of the revolution introduced by Matisse. The red dessert is a faithful remake of another brilliant but quite conventional dessert executed 11 years before. The swan-necked bottles. The two-story fruit bowl. The maid bending over the table. Everything is the same, but restated in a new language. The startling change can be summarized in one word: simplification. Colors have become pure and few in number. Shading and modeling have disappeared. Lines are drastically schematized. Three-dimensional depth has given way to flat, decorative space. The The climax of the simplified style which Matisse evolved between 1907 and 1910 came when his most ardent supporter, the rich Russian merchant Sergei Shchukin, commissioned him to do the huge twin pictures called Dance and Music. We shall see them later. However, not even the fact that they were absolute masterpieces put Matisse's mind to rest. In Still Life with Dance, he reintroduces the flattest picture ever painted into a three-dimensional room defined by oblique lines. After the intense spiritual strain of the previous years, Matisse needed to relax. He spent the winters of 1911-12 and 1912-13 in Tangier. Those trips to Morocco helped me to make the necessary transition and re-establish closer contact with nature. A feeling of paradisiac bliss emanates from the Tangier's pictures, especially from the three which compose what is known as the Moroccan triptych. This is due to the fact that the landscapes which met Matisse's eye were themselves simplified, spiritualized by the intense African light. Here, artist and subject matter are in perfect unison, two and yet one, like the goldfish in their aquarium, separate from, yet blended into, their surroundings by the transparency of the glass bowl. It is not the first time, nor the last, that the goldfish bowl occurs in Matisse's work. It is an unconscious metaphor of the role of art as the artist sees it. The picture is a mediator between the painter and the world, between the spectator and the painter's vision. A more conscious metaphor for the function of art as a mediator occurs even more often. It is Matisse's favorite theme, the window. An interviewer once asked Matisse, "Whence comes the charm of your pictures representing open windows?" Probably from the fact that, in so far as my feeling is concerned, space is one from the horizon to the interior of my studio, and that the passing ship lives in the same space as the familiar objects around me, and the wall with the window does not create two different worlds. Throughout his life, Matisse has painted some of his most important pictures about windows. In several canvases, one cannot tell whether the bright rectangle on the wall depicts a picture or a window. The confusion is deliberate. Matisse is telling us that painting is a window, that is to say, an intermediary that re-establishes a relation between divided worlds. At times, we can literally no longer tell inside from outside. The window has bridged the gap. The window is the hero. As early as 1908, he had urged his students, all things have their decided physical character, for example, a square, a rectangle. But an indecisive, indefinite form can express neither. Therefore, exaggerate according to the decided character in order to achieve expression. Matisse's painting becomes so angular, so geometric, that this period has sometimes been called his cubist phase. But his insistence on perpendiculars is far from new. Verticals are already emphasized in Path Bois de Boulogne of 1902, and more aggressively yet in the many views of Notre Dame which Matisse painted in his Paris apartments. I have come to possess the feeling of the horizontal and the vertical so as to render the resulting obliques expressive. This isn't easy. He achieved it by making almost obsessional use in his younger years of the plumb line. The plumb line is the artist's compass. I have drawn constant benefits from its use. The vertical is in my mind. I don't indicate a curve, for instance, that of a branch in a landscape, without being aware of its relation to the vertical. Now, the underlying geometric structure is violently affirmed. But the resemblance with Picasso or Juan Gris is superficial. Cubism is dispassionate, objective, intellectual. Matisse's use of geometry is passionate, subjective, emotional. (1914, 1918), the war years. The mood which Matisse wished to express in this period was black. In the north, part of his family was in the hands of the Germans. Many of his painter friends were in the trenches, and eventually his own two sons went into the army. Black dominates his pictures, together with dark greens, browns, and a deep melancholy violet. The Moroccans, one of the masterpieces of these somber times, dramatically illustrates the change of atmosphere. No doubt Matisse had turned to his memories of Tangiers to recapture their happy mood. But the picture which he produced is stern, sullen. His paintings are desperate but victorious attempts to assert the freedom of the spirit in the face of matter and of history. Like the portrait of his old patron and friend Sarah Stein, which depicts not the lady's stout body, but the slender, soaring flame that burns within it. The war is over. Matisse, now 50, feels the need to recover from the intense exaltation and experimentation of the previous years. His art becomes more relaxed, more intimate. Henceforth, his favorite models will be women. When I paint or draw, I feel a need for intimate communion with the object that inspires me, whatever it is. I identify with it, and this is what creates the centers of expression, which is the core of my art. In the case of a male artist, nothing is more apt to provoke this sentimental interpenetration, as Matisse put it, than a female model. To the interviewer, who calls these faces anonymous, the artist replies, "Why? Because I don't put any eyes in?" The face is anonymous because the expression comes from the whole picture. Eyes, nose, paralyze the spectator's imagination. On the contrary, if you offer it lines, forces, the imagination will set to work. Matisse's emotion is aroused by the grace of the flesh, but also, as in this masterful portrait of his wife, painted in 1912, by the graciousness of the soul. Empty spaces occur often in Matisse's work, but, like the Orientals whom he admires, he knows how to turn emptiness into fullness. Nymph in the Forest of 1936, a theme which Matisse had already treated some 30 years earlier, is an extreme statement of the sentimental relation that binds the artist and his model. For even when it is not a woman, but a bouquet of flowers, a pitcher or fruit, what draws Matisse to his model is love. Relation is the kinship between things. It is the common language. Relation is love, yes, love. Sometimes I stop before a motif, a corner of my studio which I find expressive, beyond my capacity, and I wait for the lightning stroke of love that must come. Just as love makes Matisse see his subjects within himself, so it makes him project his own image into his subjects. Real self-portraits are rare in his work, but involuntary intrusions of the artist's hand, feet, or bearded face are frequent. From 1916 on, Matisse, probably the model of this violinist done in 1918, returns regularly to Nice. Eventually, he will settle there. In his odalisques, he lavishes especial care on knees and elbows, not only because they connect different parts of the body, but because they articulate the flat, decorative world of arabesque in the weighted volumes of three-dimensional space. In the 30s, he returns to his basic quest for ever greater simplicity and clarity. The Pink Nude, 1935, is one of the earliest masterpieces of this new period of experimentation. As the photographs taken while Matisse was painting the Pink Nude reveal, the seemingly self-evident simplicity of the Pink Nude was the result of laborious shufflings and reshufflings. The sculptures, which often appear in Matisse's pictures, are mostly his own work. He had occasionally turned to sculpture almost from the start of his career. I did sculpture as a complement to my studies. When I was tired of painting and was no longer able to gather all the stray ends, I turned to sculpture to change my medium. But I made sculpture as a painter, not as a sculptor. He does so to regain the sense of volume when his painting is becoming flat. And as in his paintings, he moves by gradual simplifications from realistic prose to abstract poetry. That formidable desire to simplify painting now leads him out of the familiar territory of traditional art. His last two canvases, Katya and Woman in Blue Gandura, both dated 1951, are the only ones he painted in his last years. As at every decisive moment of Matisse's career, we find the dance. It is the version of the dance painted for the Barnes Foundation from 1931 to 1933 that opens his final, boldest, and most dazzling period. An arrow points the way more efficiently than a hand. The grand simplification which, at the age of 60, made Matisse as adventurous and avant-garde artist as he had been 30 years earlier, was his endeavor to turn hands into arrows, that is to say, forms into signs without loss of spiritual content. To achieve this end, Matisse replaced brush and oil by scissors and colored paper, thereby obtaining absolute flatness. His paper cutouts, as well as his brush and ink drawings, monumental and decorative, burst open the narrow boundaries of the easel painting and aspire to take possession of the real space we live in, architecture. La Piscine, the swimming pool, is a huge paper cutout composition based on memories of a trip to Tahiti which Matisse had made some 20 years earlier, and which he worked out on the walls of his bedroom like an environment. The paper cutout technique was particularly suited to Matisse's state of health, that of a semi-invalid since a serious intestinal operation from which he had almost died in 1941. Not his health, but the inner logic of his work, however, are the real reason for his use of this technique. There is no break between my former painting and my cutouts, only more absoluteness, more abstraction. All art really worthy of the name is religious. In the 1950s, Matisse's energies were largely taken up by his work on an ecclesiastical project, the chapel at Vence. Still, the chapel is no more religious than dance and music, painted at the request of Shchukin a half a century earlier. The word religion comes from a Latin verb meaning to connect. Religious experience is the experience of sharing. I shall obtain all this by the simplest means, those which enable the painter to express in the most efficient way his inner vision. We reach the highest serenity by simplifying our ideas and our plastic means. Matisse liked to quote the advice of a Chinese art teacher to his students. When drawing a tree, grow with it. There are two ways of drawing a tree. By imitation, as one is taught in European schools. And by the feeling which its approach and contemplation suggests to us, as the Orientals do. In large decoration with masks, probably Matisse's last completed work, imitation has completely given way to participation. Its luminosity, unprecedented in the history of art, is due to the fact that here Matisse has reached the point of pure joy where, as Plato put it, the light within meets the light without. The chance to combine all the facets of his activities was at last given to Matisse in 1948 when he was asked to build and decorate the chapel of the Dominican convent at Vence. When it was inaugurated in 1951, Matisse was 81 years old. For a long time, I have been wanting to synthesize all I have to say. And here, I have the opportunity to gather it all: architecture, stained glass windows, large mural drawings on ceramic panels, in a perfect unity. There is a lightness in the various elements that answer one another and give a feeling of openness, of liberation. My chapel is not meant for dying, it is meant for living. I want the visitor of the chapel to find there an easing of the spirit, so that even if he is not a believer, he will find himself in an environment where his spirit moves effortlessly, where his thoughts are clear, and where his feelings too are eased. And the benefit of his visit will come to him effortlessly, without his having to knock his head against the ground. In a letter to a friend, the octogenarian Matisse wrote, "I hope that no matter how old we live to be, we shall die young." On November 3rd, 1954, his wish was fulfilled.